The massive ship appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system like a dark omen against the stars. Its hull stretched over 2 kilometers long, covered in strange symbols that glowed with purple light. The vessel moved slowly, deliberately, broadcasting its presence to anyone with the technology to detect it. Ambassador Zex Thul stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Voice, his 4 arms folded behind his back as he gazed at the primitive solar system before him. His scaled skin shimmered under the bridge lights, and his large black eyes showed nothing but boredom. This was routine work for him. He had done this exact same mission 847 times before. The hegemony of Kethvar ruled 12,000 star systems across the galaxy. For 3,000 years, they had expanded their empire by following the same simple process. Find a new species, demand surrender, accept their submission, add another world to the empire's collection. It always worked the same way. The primitive species would panic when they saw an imperial ship. They would beg for mercy. They would agree to any terms just to avoid destruction. Within a few decades, they would be grateful citizens of the greatest empire in galactic history. Zexthul activated the communication array and began recording his message. His voice was deep and commanding, practiced from centuries of delivering ultimatums to lesser species. Primitive inhabitants of the 3rd planet, he began, using the standard opening. I am Ambassador Zexthul of the hegemony of Kethvar. Your world has been discovered by the greatest civilization in the galaxy. You should consider this a moment of great fortune. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The humans would be listening now, probably terrified and confused by this first contact with an alien species. The hegemony offers you a choice, Zexthul continued. Submit to imperial rule and accept your place as vassals of the empire, or face the consequences of resistance. You have 72 standard hours to provide an answer. Choose wisely. The message was transmitted toward Earth using multiple frequencies and languages. The Empire's computers had already analyzed human broadcasts and learned their major languages. The ultimatum would reach them in English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, and dozens of other tongues. Zexthul settled back in his command chair and waited. This was always the most boring part of the process. The primitive species needed time to panic, to realize how hopeless their situation was, and to accept the inevitable. Most took the full 72 hours before surrendering, though some of the smarter species gave up within the first day. The bridge crew of the Dominion's Voice went about their normal duties. They had seen this process many times before. Some were old enough to remember when it used to be more interesting, back when some species actually tried to fight back. But those days were long gone. Modern civilizations understood the futility of resisting the Empire. Hours passed slowly. The ship's sensors detected increased activity on the human world. Radio transmissions spiked as their primitive governments tried to coordinate a response. Their military forces went to high alert, which was amusing considering they had no way to threaten an imperial vessel. Zexthul reviewed the intelligence reports about this species called humans. They were typical mammals, barely out of their planetary cradle. They had achieved basic spaceflight and had established a few small colonies in their own star system, but nothing impressive. Their technology was crude, their society fractured into competing nations, and their military capabilities were laughable. The most interesting thing about them was their unusual aggression toward their own kind. Most species fought territorial wars in their early development, but humans seemed to have perfected the art of killing each other. Their history was filled with increasingly destructive conflicts, culminating in something they called world wars that had consumed entire continents. This violence was concerning but not unusual. Many primitive species went through violent phases before achieving the wisdom of peaceful submission to the Empire. The humans would learn, just like all the others. On the second day, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual panicked Transmissions begging for more time or asking for mercy, the humans sent a single brief message. It was transmitted from what appeared to be their primary government center in a place called Geneva. The message was simple and direct. "We have received your ultimatum. After careful consideration, we decline your offer. You have 24 hours to leave our system." Zexthul stared at the communication display in disbelief. He read the message 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. Then he had. His translator checked it again in case there was some error in the language processing. But there was no mistake. The humans had rejected the Empire's generous offer. More than that, they were demanding that an Imperial ship leave their system. It was unthinkable. It was impossible. "Sir," his communications officer said, "there may be a translation error. Perhaps they misunderstood the message." Zexthul shook his head slowly. "No, Officer Krim. They understood perfectly. They are refusing." The bridge fell silent. Several crew members exchanged confused glances. In 3,000 years of Imperial expansion, no species had ever simply refused the ultimatum. Some had tried to negotiate for better terms. Others had begged for more time. A few had attempted futile attacks on Imperial ships, but none had ever just said no. "What do we do now, sir?" the weapons officer asked. Zexthul considered his options. The standard protocol was clear. If a species refused to surrender, the Empire would send a pacification fleet to force compliance. But this situation was so unusual that he wasn't sure how to proceed. Send a follow-up message, he decided. Perhaps they need clarification about what refusal means. The second message was more direct. Zexthul explained exactly what would happen if they continued to resist. He described the size and power of Imperial fleets. He listed some of the species that had tried to fight and been utterly destroyed. He painted a vivid picture of what pacification looked like. The human response came back within an hour. It was even shorter than the first. "We understand. Our answer remains no. 22 hours. This time, there was something else in the transmission. Something that Zexthul couldn't quite identify at first. Then he realized what it was. The human who had sent the message was laughing. Not hysterically, like someone in denial about their fate. Not bitterly, like someone accepting death. But genuinely amused, as if they found the entire situation funny. Zexthul had never encountered anything like this in his long career. He was trained to handle panic, desperation, anger, and resignation. But amusement, that was completely outside his experience. "Sir," his sensor operator reported, "we're detecting unusual activity in the system. Multiple energy signatures are appearing near the large satellite of the third planet." Zexthul looked at the sensor displays. There were indeed new contacts, appearing throughout the human star system. At first, he assumed they were civilian ships fleeing from the inner planets, but as more data came in, he realized these signatures were much larger than expected. "What kind of ships are those?" he asked. The sensor operator studied his instruments carefully. "Unknown, sir. They're big, much bigger than anything in our database for this species, and there are a lot of them." More contacts appeared every hour. By the end of the second day, the sensors showed dozens of large vessels moving through the human system. They weren't fleeing. Instead, they seemed to be taking up defensive positions. Zexthul felt the first stirring of uncertainty in his chest. Something was very wrong here. The humans weren't behaving like any species he had ever encountered. They weren't afraid. They weren't begging. They were preparing for war, and worst of all, they seemed confident about their chances. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the center of the United Earth Defense Command, watching dozens of screens that showed every corner of the solar system. Around her, officers from every nation on Earth worked together with a coordination that would have seemed impossible just days before. The alien ultimatum had done what centuries of diplomacy couldn't manage. It had united humanity under a single banner. "Status report," Chen commanded. her voice calm despite the magnitude of what they were facing. "All primary battle groups are moving into position," reported Commander Jackson from the tactical station. "The Luna shipyards have released their entire inventory. Asteroid Base 7 is launching its Dreadnought squadron as we speak." Chen nodded, allowing herself a small smile. The alien ambassador probably thought he was dealing with a primitive species that had barely mastered spaceflight. He had no idea what humanity had been building in secret for the past 50 years. The first alien signals had been detected decades ago by Earth's deep space monitoring stations. Not the dramatic arrival of this ambassador, but subtle traces of vast movements across the galaxy, radio emissions from distant stars, energy signatures that suggested massive fleets, the careful analysis of astronomical data that showed entire star systems going dark. Earth's governments had quietly reached the same conclusion. Something was out there, and it was coming their way eventually. The evidence suggested a pattern of expansion, a methodical conquest of the galaxy that would inevitably reach human space. So they had prepared. President Martinez appeared on the main communication screen from the emergency session at the UN headquarters. Behind her, Chen could see the faces of every major world leader, all of them connected by secure quantum channels. "Admiral Chen," Martinez said, "the vote was unanimous. Humanity will not kneel to these aliens. You have full authorization to proceed with Operation Defiance." Chen felt a surge of pride in her species. When faced with impossible odds, humans didn't surrender. They got angry. And when humans got angry, they got creative. "Understood, Madam President. All units are standing by." The screens around the command center showed the true scope of humanity's preparations. What the aliens saw as a single planet with a few small colonies was actually something far more dangerous. Hidden shipyards orbited behind Luna, concealed by the moon's bulk from any casual observation. Massive construction facilities had been built inside hollowed-out asteroids, their heat signatures masked by careful engineering. Most importantly, humanity had been designing warships for decades with a single purpose in mind: to kill aliens who thought they could conquer Earth. The vessels emerging from their hidden berths bore no resemblance to the peaceful exploration ships that humanity used for its public space program. These were predators, built with every lesson learned from thousands of years of human warfare. Their hulls were angular and aggressive, designed to present minimal target profiles while maximizing firepower. Their weapon systems represented the absolute peak of human engineering, refined through countless simulations of combat against unknown alien technologies. Each ship bore names that honored Earth's greatest military victories and most determined defenders. The dreadnought Stalingrad was the largest vessel humanity had ever built, its main guns capable of cracking moons. The carrier Midway held squadrons of fighter craft that could dance through asteroid fields while delivering precision strikes. The battlecruiser Thermopylae was designed for one purpose: to hold impossible odds against overwhelming enemies. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Wong from the intelligence station, "we're getting detailed scans of the alien vessel. It's big, but not as advanced as we expected. Their hull design prioritizes appearance over function. Look at all those decorative elements that serve no tactical purpose." Chen studied the readouts from their most powerful sensors. The alien ship was indeed massive and impressive, but it looked more like a ceremonial barge than a warship. Its hull was covered in elaborate decorations and glowing symbols that would make excellent target markers. Its weapon ports were clearly visible, arranged in symmetrical patterns that looked beautiful but left obvious blind spots. "They've grown soft," Chen murmured. "This is what happens when you win too easily for too long." Commander Rodriguez looked up from the strategic planning station. "Admiral, we've completed the analysis of their ultimatum broadcast. The signal strength and transmission patterns suggest they're not expecting any real resistance. This feels like a routine operation to them." That was exactly what Chen had hoped to hear. The aliens had made the same mistake that countless armies throughout history had made when facing humans. They had underestimated their enemy. Humanity's advantage wasn't superior technology, though their weapons were certainly formidable. Their advantage wasn't numbers, though they had built far more ships than any reasonable analysis would suggest necessary for a single-planet species. Their advantage was something much more fundamental. Humans were good at war, not just the technology of war or the logistics of war, but the essential nature of warfare itself. Every human on Earth was descended from ancestors who had survived countless conflicts, who had learned to adapt and overcome against impossible odds. Human history was written in blood and struggle, and those lessons had been carved into their very DNA. The aliens had ruled an empire for 3,000 years, but they had done it through intimidation and overwhelming force. They had probably never faced an enemy that fought back with real determination. They certainly had never faced an enemy that enjoyed fighting. "Communications," Chen ordered. "Open a channel to all battle groups. It's time to send our reply." The response had been crafted carefully by a joint committee of linguists, psychologists, and military strategists. It was designed to convey exactly the right message. Humanity understood the threat. Humanity was not afraid. And humanity was ready for war. "Attention, alien vessel." Chen spoke into the transmitter, her voice carrying the authority of an entire species. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Command. We have received your ultimatum and considered it carefully. Our answer is no. We will not surrender. We will not submit. We will not kneel." She paused, letting the weight of her words register with the alien ambassador who was undoubtedly listening. "You have made a critical error in judgment. You assume that because we are young as a spacefaring species, we are weak. You assume that because we come from a single world, we are helpless. You are wrong on both counts." Around the command center, officers smiled grimly as they watched their sensor displays. More ships were emerging from concealment every minute, taking up positions throughout the solar system. The alien vessel was now surrounded by a force that outnumbered it dozens to one. "Earth has spent 50 years preparing for this moment," Chen continued. "We detected your empire's expansion pattern long before you found us. We have been building, training, and planning for the day when conquest would come to our doorstep. Today is that day." The final part of the message was the most important. It needed to make clear that this wasn't just defiance born of ignorance or desperation. This was a calculated decision made by a species that understood exactly what they were choosing. "You offered us 72 hours to surrender. We are giving you 24 hours to leave our system. After that, we will consider your presence an act of war and respond accordingly. Choose wisely." Chen cut the transmission and turned to her officers. Around her, the command center buzzed with quiet efficiency as humanity's war machine prepared for action. This was the moment they had all trained for, the test that would determine whether Earth remained free or became just another conquered world in an alien empire. "All units report ready, Admiral," Commander Jackson announced. Chen nodded and settled into her command chair. In a few hours, the alien ambassador would have to make a decision. He could leave peacefully and report back to his superiors that Earth was not the easy conquest they had expected, or he could stay and learn exactly why humans had spent their entire history perfecting the art of warfare. Either way, the galaxy was about to discover that there was a new apex predator among the stars. Fleet Commander Vorth Ak stood on the bridge of the Imperial dreadnought Eternal Conquest, watching the swirling energies of hyperspace through the massive viewports. Behind him stretched 200 of the Empire's finest warships, more than enough firepower to sterilize an entire star system if necessary. The fleet had assembled in record time after Ambassador Zexthul's urgent report reached Imperial command. A species refusing the ultimatum was unprecedented, but the Empire's response was swift and overwhelming. No primitive civilization would be allowed to challenge Imperial authority, no matter how delusional their resistance might be. Vorthak had commanded pacification fleets for over 2 centuries. He had reduced rebellious worlds to ash and broken the spirit of countless species who thought they could oppose the hegemony. This mission should have been routine. Arrive, demonstrate imperial power, accept the humans' terrified surrender, and return home with another victory for the Empire. Approaching target system, announced Navigation Officer Keltvar, dropping to sublight in 30 seconds. All ships, maintain formation, Vorthak commanded. Weapons powered but not targeted. We want them to see our strength before we destroy them. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 200 vessels arranged in a pattern designed to inspire maximum terror in primitive species. The ships were works of art as much as instruments of war, their hulls gleaming with ceremonial armor and decorated with the symbols of imperial conquest. At the center, the Eternal Conquest displayed its full glory, 5 kilometers of polished metal and glowing energy conduits, a monument to the Empire's technological superiority. For a moment, Vorthak felt the familiar satisfaction of a job. Well done. The human system lay spread before them, and their primitive world hung like a blue jewel waiting to be plucked. This would be over within hours. Then the sensor readings came in, and everything changed. Sir, the sensor operator's voice was confused, almost disbelieving. I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. Multiple contacts, hundreds of them. Vorthak turned to the tactical display, expecting to see the usual scatter of civilian vessels fleeing in panic. Instead, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. The human system was filled with warships. Not the crude chemical rockets or simple fusion drives he had expected from a primitive species. These were proper military vessels, sleek and predatory, arranged in battle formations that spoke of professional military doctrine. They were everywhere, lurking behind planets, emerging from asteroid fields, rising from the gravity wells of gas giants. How many? Vorthak demanded. The sensor operator worked frantically at his console. Still counting, sir. At least 600 contacts, possibly more. They were hidden behind planetary bodies and inside asteroid fields. Our sensors couldn't detect them until we were in system. 600 ships. The humans outnumbered his fleet 3-1, despite being a supposedly primitive single-world species. Vorthak felt the first stirring of real concern. In 2 centuries, of commanding Imperial fleets, he had never faced odds like this. Sir, Communications Officer Thexeron reported, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Put it through. The main screen lit up with the image of a human female in military uniform. Her face was calm and professional, showing none of the fear that Vorthak expected from a primitive species facing Imperial might. Behind her, he could see what was clearly a military command center, bustling with activity. Fleet Commander Vorthak, the human said, somehow knowing his name and rank. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Command. You are in violation of human space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Vorthak stared at the screen in disbelief. The human was giving him an ultimatum. A primitive species from a single world was threatening an Imperial fleet. It was beyond comprehension. Human, he said slowly, you clearly do not understand your situation. I command 200 of the Empire's finest warships. Your crude vessels pose no threat to Imperial technology. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. The human admiral actually smiled. Commander, I don't think you understand your situation. You're outnumbered 3-1 in hostile territory, facing an enemy that has been preparing for this fight for 50 years. You have one chance to leave peacefully. I suggest you take it. Impossible, Vorthak snarled. No primitive species could threaten Imperial vessels. Your ships are toys compared to our technology. Let me show you exactly how wrong you are, Admiral Chen replied. The transmission cut off, and immediately the human fleet began to move, but not in the chaotic, panicked way that primitive species usually fought. This was coordinated, professional, and utterly terrifying in its precision. The human ships moved like a single organism, each vessel taking its assigned position in a complex three-dimensional formation. Their acceleration curves were perfect, their spacing optimal, their tactical positioning flawless. Vorthak had seen this kind of coordination only from the Empire's most elite units. "Sir," the weapons officer reported, "they're targeting us. All human vessels have weapons locked on our fleet." "Return the favor," Vorthak ordered. "Target their largest ships. Prepare to demonstrate Imperial firepower." But before he could give the order to fire, the humans opened the engagement. They didn't posture or demand another surrender. They didn't announce their intentions or give any warning. They simply opened fire with a coordinated precision that spoke of countless hours of training and preparation. The first volley was devastating. Kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed tore through Imperial shields like they weren't there. Energy beams of unknown design carved through armor plating that was supposed to be impenetrable. Most shocking of all, several Imperial ships simply went dark as their computer systems were somehow invaded and shut down by human electronic warfare. "Shields down to 60%, the defense officer shouted. "Hull breaches on deck 7 through 12. How are they penetrating our defenses so easily?" Vorthak stared at the tactical display in horror. In the space of 30 seconds, the humans had disabled or destroyed 15 Imperial vessels. The Eternal Conquest itself was taking damage that should have been impossible from primitive weapons. "Return fire," he commanded. "All ships, maximum firepower." The Imperial fleet finally responded, unleashing centuries of technological advancement against the human vessels. Energy weapons that could crack planets fired in perfect synchronization. Missile volleys that could devastate entire fleets streaked toward human positions, and the humans danced through it all like it was nothing. Their ships moved with an agility that defied physics, turning and twisting through space in patterns that no sane pilot would attempt. They used the system's gravity wells to slingshot around planets and moons, gaining speed and changing vectors in ways that made them nearly impossible to target. When Imperial weapons did connect, the humans seemed to absorb the damage and keep fighting. But worst of all was their tactical doctrine. The humans didn't fight like any species Vorthak had ever encountered. They were aggressive beyond reason, pressing attacks that should have been suicidal. They coordinated their efforts with a precision that spoke of extensive experience in real combat, and they seemed to anticipate every Imperial move before it happened. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "they're using our own formation against us. They've split into smaller groups that are attacking our flanks and rear. Our ships are having trouble targeting them without hitting each other." Vorthak realized with growing horror that the humans were better at this than the Empire was. Not just better equipped or better positioned, but better at the fundamental art of warfare. They fought like a species that had been perfecting combat for thousands of years, while the Empire had grown soft through easy conquests. "All ships break formation," he ordered. "Independent maneuvering, focus fire on their command vessels." But it was too late. The humans had already broken his fleet's cohesion and were systematically destroying Imperial ships one by one. Their tactics were brutal and efficient, showing no mercy and taking no prisoners. They fought like they enjoyed it. As the Eternal Conquest shuddered under another devastating attack, Vorthak finally understood the terrible truth. The Empire hadn't discovered a primitive species ripe for conquest. They had found apex predators who had been waiting for someone to challenge them. And now those predators were teaching the galaxy a lesson that had been forgotten for 3,000 years. Some species should never be provoked. The bridge of the Eternal Conquest was chaos. Alarm sirens wailed as damage reports flooded in from every section of the massive dreadnought. Smoke filled the air from overloaded systems, and emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow. Fleet Commander Vorthak gripped his command chair as another human kinetic round punched through the ship's hull somewhere below. "Hull breach on Deck 15, shouted Damage Control Officer Nexthol. "Sections 20 through 30 are venting atmosphere. Emergency bulkheads are sealing, but we've lost 3 gun batteries." Vorthak stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In less than an hour of combat, the Imperial fleet had been reduced from 200 ships to fewer than 80. The humans were dismantling them with surgical precision, targeting critical systems and command vessels with an efficiency that spoke of detailed intelligence and countless hours of tactical planning. "How is this possible?" he whispered to himself. "They're primitives. They shouldn't even have real weapons." But the evidence was undeniable. The human vessels moved through space like living things, their formations flowing and adapting faster than Imperial tactical computers could track. Their weapons punched through shields and armor that had protected the Empire for millennia. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to know exactly where to hit each Imperial ship for maximum effect. "Sir," Communications Officer Thexron called out, "Captain Velktar of the Domination is requesting permission to retreat. He's lost engines and main weapons. The humans are closing in for the kill." Vorthak watched on the display as 3 sleek human destroyers converged on the crippled Imperial cruiser. Instead of simply destroying it with long-range fire, they moved in close and began systematically disabling its remaining systems. It was like watching surgeons at work, cutting apart their victim with clinical precision. "They're not just destroying us," he realized. "They're studying us, learning how our ships work." The tactical officer looked up from his station, his scaled face pale with fear. "Sir, the humans are capturing disabled vessels. They're boarding our ships and taking prisoners." This was unprecedented. In 3,000 years of Imperial expansion, no primitive species had ever captured Imperial technology. The humans weren't just defeating the fleet. They were stealing Imperial secrets in real time. "Signal all ships," Vorthak ordered. "Activate self-destruct protocols on any vessel that cannot escape. We cannot allow our technology to fall into primitive hands." But even this desperate measure was thwarted by human ingenuity. Several Imperial ships that tried to self-destruct found their systems disabled by sophisticated electronic warfare. The humans had somehow learned to hack Imperial computers faster than trained technicians could trigger destruction sequences. "Sir," the sensor operator reported, "we're detecting new contacts entering the system, more human vessels emerging from behind the outer planets." Vorthak looked at the updated tactical display and felt his heart sink. At least 100 additional human ships were joining the battle, including vessels larger than anything they had seen so far. The humans hadn't even committed their full strength to the initial engagement. "They were holding reserves," he whispered. "They planned this entire battle from the beginning." The largest of the new arrivals was a massive vessel that dwarfed even the Eternal Conquest. Its hull was a matte black that seemed to absorb light, giving it an ominous presence that made Vorthak's skin crawl. As he watched, the monster ship began launching waves of smaller craft, fighters and bombers that swarmed toward the remaining Imperial vessels like angry insects. "That ship," the tactical officer said, checking his databases. "It's not in any of our intelligence files. We have no idea what it's capable of." They found out quickly. The massive human vessel opened fire with weapons that made Imperial dreadnought guns look like toys. Beams of coherent energy lanced out across space, each shot precise enough to target individual weapon emplacements on Imperial ships. Where the beams struck, Imperial vessels simply ceased to exist, their hulls vaporized in microseconds. Vorthak realized that the humans had been toying with them. The devastating efficiency they had shown in the first hour of combat was just a warm-up. Now they were showing their true capabilities, and it was terrifying beyond imagination. "All remaining ships," he broadcast on the fleet command frequency, "general retreat, break off engagement and prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace." But the humans had anticipated this as well. As Imperial ships began turning toward the system's edge, they found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had somehow positioned themselves perfectly to cut off retreat. The humans had surrounded the entire Imperial fleet without anyone noticing. "Hyperspace inhibitors!" the navigation officer reported in panic. "They're generating some kind of field that's preventing jump calculations. We can't enter hyperspace." Vorthak stared at the readings in disbelief. Hyperspace inhibitor technology was supposed to be beyond primitive species. It required advanced understanding of dimensional physics that took civilizations thousands of years to develop. Yet somehow, these humans had not only mastered it, but deployed it as a standard battlefield tactic. "Sir," Weapons Officer Korthdale said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the human admiral." The main screen activated, showing Admiral Chen again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood several figures in Imperial uniforms, officers from ships that had been captured during the battle. They appeared unharmed but defeated, their expressions showing the shock of soldiers who had discovered they weren't invincible after all. Fleet Commander Vorthak, Admiral Chen, said, her voice calm and professional, "As you can see, we have captured several of your vessels and their crews. I'm prepared to offer terms for the surrender of your remaining forces." "Surrender?" Vorthak snarled. "The Empire does not surrender to primitives." "You keep using that word," Admiral Chen replied. "I don't think it means what you think it means. Commander, your Empire made a critical error. You assumed that young meant weak. You confused technological simplicity with tactical ignorance. Most importantly, you forgot that the most dangerous predators are often the ones that appear harmless." She gestured to something off-screen, and the display split to show multiple views of the battle. Imperial ships burning in space, human vessels moving with impossible coordination. The massive black dreadnought systematically dismantling what remained of the Imperial formation. "Humanity has been at war with itself for its entire existence," Admiral Chen continued. "We have spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing our own kind. Every tactic you're seeing today was developed fighting other humans. Every weapon was designed to overcome human defenses. Every strategy was tested against human intelligence." Vorthak felt a chill run down his spine as he began to understand what she was saying. "You're not fighting a primitive species, Commander. You're fighting the apex predators of a world where only the strongest, smartest, and most ruthless survive to pass on their genes. You're fighting a species that turned warfare into an art form out of necessity." The Eternal Conquest shuddered as another human weapon found its mark. Around him, Vorthak could see his bridge crew beginning to lose hope. They had been trained to fight primitive rebels and untrained conscripts. None of them had ever faced an enemy that was better at warfare than they were. "Your choices are simple," Admiral Chen said. "Surrender now, and your crews will be treated according to the laws of war. Continue fighting, and we will demonstrate why humans are the most dangerous species in this galaxy." As if to emphasize her point, 3 more Imperial ships exploded on the tactical display, their deaths as precise and efficient as everything else the humans had done. Vorthak looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. They were good. Soldiers who had served the Empire faithfully for decades. They didn't deserve to die because he had underestimated a species of born killers. "Signal the human fleet," he said quietly. "The Imperial forces. Surrender." For the first time in 3,000 years, an Imperial fleet had been utterly defeated by a species they had tried to conquer. And as Vorthak prepared to hand over his sword to Admiral Chen, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of the Empire's troubles. The emergency session of the Imperial High Council had been running for 3 days straight. In the Great Hall of the Hegemony's capital world, representatives from every major species in the Empire gathered around a massive holographic display, showing the impossible data from the human system. Chancellor Mordith, supreme leader of the Kethvar for the past 2 centuries, stood at the center of the chaos. His usually pristine ceremonial robes were wrinkled from days without sleep, and his scaled face showed the strain of trying to comprehend what had happened to Fleet Commander Vorthak's armada. "Explain to me again," he said slowly, How to? 100 Imperial warships were defeated by a single world species that we classified as primitive just 1 week ago. The intelligence briefing had been delivered dozens of times, but each repetition only made the situation seem more impossible. Admiral Zorthkan, the Empire's senior military advisor, stepped forward with the latest reports from their surviving ships. The humans weren't primitive, Chancellor. They were hiding their true capabilities. Our intelligence network completely failed to detect the massive military buildup they had been conducting for decades. The holographic display showed detailed scans of human vessels captured during the battle. The technology was advanced, not beyond Imperial capabilities, but sophisticated enough to pose a serious threat. More concerning were the tactical analyses that showed just how effectively the humans had used their forces. They fought like they had been planning this specific battle for years, Admiral Zorthkan continued. Every move they made suggested detailed knowledge of Imperial ship designs, weapons systems, and tactical doctrine. They knew exactly where to hit us for maximum effect. Council member Velthar of the Axiom species raised one of her 4 arms. How is such preparation possible? We only discovered their system last month. They couldn't have known we were coming. That's just it, the intelligence officer replied. They did know we were coming. They detected our expansion pattern decades ago and have been preparing for eventual contact ever since. While we thought we were discovering them, they were studying us. The implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, the Empire had expanded through the galaxy using the same basic strategy. Find a primitive species, demand surrender, crush any resistance with overwhelming force. It had worked perfectly every time because no species had ever been ready for Imperial contact. But humanity was different. Instead of being caught off guard, they had spent 50 years preparing for war against an enemy they had never met. They had analyzed Imperial tactics from long-range observations and designed countermeasures for weapons they had only seen from light years away. The survivors' reports are even more disturbing, Admiral Zorthkan said grimly. The humans didn't just defeat our fleet. They captured 17 intact vessels and hundreds of prisoners. They're reverse engineering our technology as we speak. This news sent a wave of shocked murmurs through the council chamber. Imperial technology was supposed to be inviolate, protected by quantum encryption and self-destruct systems that prevented capture. Yet somehow these humans had bypassed every safeguard. Worse, the Admiral continued, they're already using what they've learned. Our scouts report human vessels have been detected near our border systems. They're not just defending. They're home, they're preparing for offensive operations. Chancellor Mordith felt a cold dread settling in his chest. The humans weren't behaving like any conquered species in Imperial history. Most primitive civilizations took decades to recover from a demonstration of Imperial power. These humans had bounced back from their victory and were already planning their next move. What do we know about their military capabilities? He asked. The tactical display shifted to show estimates of human force strength based on the battle data. The numbers were sobering. Conservative estimates suggested the humans had at least 1,000 warships, with more being constructed in hidden shipyards throughout their system. Optimistic estimates were much worse. They appear to have been preparing for total war. Admiral Zorthkan reported. Every asteroid in their system has been militarized. Every moon harbors weapons platforms. Their entire civilization has been organized around the principle that they would eventually face a superior enemy. Council member Thexval of the Zephyrian Collective spoke up. Surely they cannot match the full might of the Empire. We control 12,000 systems. They have one. Quality over quantity, the intelligence officer replied. The humans fight, like they've been at war their entire existence. Because they have been. Their species has a unique history of constant conflict with itself. They've spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare in ways that most civilized species never experience. The holographic display shifted again, showing recordings from the battle. Imperial officers watched in fascination and horror as human ships moved with impossible coordination, their pilots executing maneuvers that would kill most species through acceleration alone. The humans seemed to thrive in conditions that would paralyze other civilizations. "They're not just good at war," Admiral Zorthkin said quietly. "They enjoy it. Our psychological profiles suggest that humans actually find combat exhilarating. They don't fight because they have to. They fight because they want to." This revelation sent a chill through the council chamber. The Empire ruled through intimidation and the threat of violence. But what happened when you threatened a species that wasn't afraid of violence? What happened when you challenged predators, who had been waiting their entire evolutionary history for something worth fighting? "Chancellor," interrupted Communications Officer Kelt Dash, "we're receiving a transmission from the human system. It's directed at the Imperial capital." Put it through. The holographic display dissolved into the image of Admiral Sarah Chen, standing on what was clearly the bridge of a human warship. Behind her, officers worked at stations that showed star charts of Imperial space. The humans weren't hiding their intentions. "Chancellor Mordeth," Admiral Chen said, somehow knowing his name and rank. "I am Admiral Chen of the United Earth Defense Command. I believe we need to talk." "Human," Mordeth replied, trying to inject authority into his voice. "You have attacked Imperial forces. This act of aggression cannot stand. Surrender now, and we may show mercy." Admiral Chen smiled, and Mordeth felt his confidence waver. It was not the smile of someone who feared Imperial power. "Chancellor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't attack your forces. We defended ourselves when you invaded our space and threatened our world. What happened to Fleet Commander Vorthak was self-defense." "You defeated an Imperial fleet," Mordeth snarled. "No primitive species—" "There's that word again," Admiral Chen interrupted. "Primitive. You keep using it like it means something. Let me be clear, Chancellor. Humanity is not primitive. We are focused. For 50 years, we have devoted our entire civilization to preparing for this moment. We built weapons, trained soldiers, and developed tactics with one goal in mind: to defeat an empire that thought it could conquer Earth." The display behind Admiral Chen shifted to show images of massive shipyards, training facilities, and weapons testing ranges. The scale was breathtaking, an entire world transformed into a military-industrial complex. "We studied your expansion pattern. We analyzed your tactics. We prepared countermeasures for every weapon system your empire has ever deployed in battle. What you thought was a first contact scenario was actually the final exam for 50 years of preparation." Mordeth realized with growing horror that the humans had been planning this conversation as carefully as they had planned the battle. They weren't offering surrender or begging for mercy. They were negotiating from a position of strength. "You have a choice to make, Chancellor," Admiral Chen continued. "You can continue to think of humanity as a primitive species to be conquered, in which case you'll discover exactly how much damage motivated primitives can do to your empire. Or you can accept that the galaxy has a new apex predator and learn to coexist with us as equals. The Empire does not negotiate with rebels. Then the Empire is about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between rebels and predators," Admiral Chen replied. "You see, Chancellor, your empire has been very successful against species that wanted to be left alone. But you've never faced a species that wanted to expand. You've never dealt with a civilization that looks at your 12,000 worlds and thinks those would make nice colonies." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. For 3,000 years, the Kethvar had been the ones making threats and demands. No species had ever dared to challenge imperial authority so directly. But as Chancellor Mordeth looked around at the faces of his advisors, he saw the same realization dawning on all of them. The Empire had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. They had challenged a species of apex predators and discovered that predators didn't just defend themselves, they hunted back. and somewhere in the darkness between stars, human. Ships were already moving toward Imperial space, carrying weapons designed by a species that had turned warfare into an art form. The galaxy was about to learn why some species should never be provoked.